Hi everybody. I'm been thinking a lot about books lately and been teaching in the high school class, so I figured I had some stuff to be able to make a video about. Um, I guess I'll start. I'm just going to read some poems, kind of more contemporary stuff, I guess. The first one here is going to be from Julio Cortázar. It's from this collection called Save Twilight. And the poem I'm going to read is called Time's Distribution. More and more we believe less and less in so many things that made our lives more full, Plato's or Goethe's highest, most indisputable values, the word, its dove above history's arc, the work's survival, the family line and our inheritance. Which isn't to say we fall with the fervor of neophytes for that science landing its robots on the moon. The truth of the matter is it leaves us cold, and if Dr. Barnard transplants a heart, we'd prefer 1,000 times over that anyone's happiness be the exact, essential reflection of life, until their irreplaceable heart might softly say enough. More and more we believe less and less in the utilization of humanism for this stereophonic nirvana of mandarins and aesthetes, which doesn't mean that when there's a moment's peace, we don't read Rilke, Plato, or Verlaine, or listen to the clear clarions, or look at the trembling angels of Angelico. He has some more good poems in there, but just wanted to read that one. And yeah, I guess that's what I've been trying to do with my classes. Today I just did one that I designed on T.S. Eliot and E. Cummings. It was like an introduction to modernism. And I think generally what teachers try to do, which does have some merit to it, is read a poem and then show the kids how to totally, tear it apart. That's kind of like the stereotype of what an English teacher does, I guess. And I don't really see that that's valuable, at least to do very often. I think it's better to do it towards less valuable things, at least whenever students don't have very clear ideas of how to do anything. Tear apart a horrible short story or poem, whatever. Doesn't really affect much. But if I was to take away the joy of, like, for example, today we looked at The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot, and then Anyone Lived in a Pretty How Town by E. Cummings, and then also two William Carlos Williams that we added. Me and my teacher I'm working with is the we. This is Just to Say in the Red Wheelbarrow. And basically all I did is like give a little introduction to modernism, what it is, kind of the time surrounding it, Einstein, Fritz Haber, World War I, development of airplanes and cars, and then I just read the poems. I tried, because you can find recordings of T.S. Eliot and E. Cummings reading those particular two poems, but it wasn't working, so I had to end up reading them. And I didn't really take them apart, because I don't really believe in that. And it does seem kind of silly, like, well then what are you doing teaching? But really all set. I kind of see teaching, and these are AP classes, so these kids are supposed to be, taking a college class, so to say, or getting college credit for this. And yeah, I've noticed that some kids completely don't even understand what poetry is doing. They don't understand what poetry is. And I guess that's very difficult for me to imagine because it just was so obvious to me. Like, there's no possible world where I wouldn't have understood poetry. Another problem I've noticed as a teacher, is I can't understand why anyone would not be interested in history at all. Some people, they'll literally say, I'm not interested in history. How can you not be interested in history? History is everything. History is everything. You know, you say you're not interested in history, but you like math. Most of math is history. But of course they don't think of it that way. They think history is like memorizing dates and listening to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, which is the problem, obviously. But, you know, I even skipped that. Like, I enjoyed history before people could make me not, so I guess, I don't know. But anyway, I just have trouble with that. Another poem I want to read is by a German poet I found recently. He's still alive. Durst Grunbein. He's a originally East German poet. And these lyric poems of his are really nice. They were done in the 80s. This is called Monological Poem number 1. If what goes on suddenly strikes you as atrocious, try and stay calm. Say it in such a way the person at the other end can't help thinking, I probably wouldn't have put it any differently myself. There are hot forms and cold forms in poems no matter how you break them, and what you print them on are always cold, no matter how hot they were at the manufacturing stage. And yet hot and cold sometimes aren't even all that far apart, and it has been known for the one to turn into the other. The ripest pathos becomes the animating gurgle of air bubbles from a soul in the depths. Because what is the whole surreal joke shop of terrors compared to the infinitely chance little tricks of a poem? And that's the real highlight there. Obviously, you can tell. Because what is the whole surreal joke shop of terrors compared to the infinitely chance little tricks of a poem? That's the kind of, like, you know, twisting language that E. Cummings does so well. I love it. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the comparisons between science and literature, you know, as I like to do, and I can't help but think about that comparison with the Nobel Prize being announced, what was it, last week? And, you know, having to deal with the fact that the people who won the physics prize, you know, Roger Penrose, when he was 33, he helped further develop the concept and reality of black holes, and he won half of the physics prize. And then, you know, the 2 women who did the gene editing, I think that was for chemistry, if I remember correctly. And then you compare it to Louise Gluck, I think is how you say her last name. It's like how is that not just totally embarrassing for English language poetry as a whole? How is that just not, like, totally, like, just truly an embarrassment where your face turns red that you're involved with poetry and this is the best that you have? And you know, when I was thinking about this, I was like, well, okay, who would I have chosen instead? Because it's easy to say, oh, this is terrible. But then, like, okay, who would have done poetry justice? And I was trying to confine myself to English language poets because that, you know, that's who won. And I basically couldn't think of any from that generation. I was trying to think of people like born in the 40s, effectively, or maybe even the early 50s. I was trying to confine myself to that range because that's what she is. You know, and like her, I had read her stuff before, but it was completely unimpressive. Just like totally forgettable, cheap, mundane. Mundane in and of itself is not bad, but combined with everything else, basic. And, you know, it's effectively like the diary of an average woman put in like mediocre poetry. You know, she talks about like hating love, which is like kind of a teenage type of feeling, and then, which is that, what is it, whatever the name of that orange poem, Mock Orange, that's her feminist anthem. And then you have her drowning child poem, and then you have her poems about her divorce. It's like just how fucking typical, really. So cheap, so cheap. And, you know, that's what it is, I guess. And yeah, I was thinking of like, well, who could replace her if I was in control and I could pick someone else? I couldn't pick anyone else. The only poet from that era, like that exact era, that I think is like significantly better or worth even mentioning in the name of a Nobel would be Frank Stanford. But of course, he died when he was young, and he would have never won it anyway. But if you're just thinking about poets, but I mean, if you're thinking about prose writers, and even T.S. Eliot mentioned this, that the poets of his age got a lot of their inspiration from prose writers, which is still the case today. You know, you have McCarthy. You know, who would be upset if Pynchon won? At least those two would have been significantly better choices than fucking Louise Gluck. I mean, you gotta be kidding me. But it just shows the sort of skill and respect that poetry has in English, and especially in America. Terrible, absolutely terrible. It's kind of like the presidents, the possible presidents we have. It's like, out of, what would you say, 250 million people over the age of 18, or however many it is, 200 million people maybe, whoever. Is this the best that we have, really? That's what you're telling me, this is the best that we have? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe that Louis Gluck is even worth mentioning. But, you know, why aren't the good poets being found? And I found this hilarious article. It was something like for the Man Booker, which is a joke anyway, but it's like, where are all the good young male writers? It's like, they're being overlooked because they're male. I mean, isn't that an obvious answer to the question? I wouldn't be surprised if when you submit a manuscript you have to put the ethnicity of your last name and then put a picture of you. And, you know, yeah. But, yeah, and then I kind of just want to talk about some other books I've been looking at. I just got an interesting one today that I was pleased to find. I hadn't really, I kind of looked into this poet before, but not especially clearly, and I'm definitely not saying this right, but Songs of Mihawk the Damascene by Adonis. And I had been interested in Adonis for a while because I know he's pretty much considered an exceptional Arabic poet of his time. Same generation as McCarthy and Pynchon, 1930s, born in the 1930s. So I was really pleased to be able to find this because I wasn't really interested in looking at his stuff he wrote when he was really old. Most poets don't write very good stuff when they're really old. So I was pleased to find that because that's something he wrote when he was 31, and it is very, very nice. How would I describe it? It's kind of like, I would say pseudo-religious poems, but in the sense of having the air of a religious poem with no religion behind it. Yeah, I think that's an alright description. And it kind of got me thinking about this other book I got recently from the like kind of translation Twitter that is the only Twitter I really care about, the only Twitter I can stand. But I was tipped off for this next book by Andre and friends from, the untranslated. Imposters by Al-Hariri. And since I've been so busy lately, I really haven't been able to do much, like, I guess you could say, complete reading. So I've been focusing on a lot of poetry and a lot of shorter essays and shorter books. So I've only had the opportunity to kind of sample different parts of this book, but it is a work originally in Arabic from, I can't remember the exact, 12th century. And I was really pleased that it's basically about a confidence man. That's what caught me off, or set me off to be interested in it first. But then I saw that in the original Arabic, it's considered the second best work in Arabic compared to the Quran. The Quran's first, the second, as far as the skill it shows. And originally the author wrote it each section in varying styles, and people didn't believe he actually did it, so he had to try to create them on the spot, and he couldn't. And then he went home and actually made stuff worth sharing. But the translation is interesting because each section, 50 rogues' tales translated 50 ways. And the 50 ways are different English styles. As examples, one tale is translated as the language of Frederick Douglass. There's one tale that's translated as New York gang slang. There's one that's like Mark Twain, in the style of Mark Twain, and so on. So each of the 50 are translated 50 ways. And he used a lot of references, or he used a lot of, he was helped a lot by his friends that he knows who speak different dialects or come from different countries and are able to help him with different dialects of English. And I thought that was really an interesting thing to do. So, little heads up if you weren't aware of that. That's all that is supposed to be. And then, another thing I've been thinking about a lot lately that I think relates to the T.S. Eliot, the Hollow Man, and Ash Wednesday and things like that is that, and also I watched part of Interstellar last night. It's a long movie, which has, Dylan Thomas, "Do not go gentle into that good night," which was the poem that I started today with. It's like a little wake up. And then we went into the modernist, but yeah, it's the idea that I'm not sure how pessimistic or hopeful to be about the continuation of our global civilization we have going on right now, because as far as I can tell, we have way too many people on Earth, past any expectation of sanity. I recently became aware of the fact that people in the Arctic have high exposure to pesticides because the atmosphere works like a distillery, where the pesticides are mostly used in the equatorial region, and they are evaporated into the air, moved to the north, and then because the air is cold, they're dropped into the water. And it's absorbed by small fish, eaten by larger fish, eaten by larger fish. The larger fish are eaten by seals, and the seals are eaten by the people who live in the Arctic. And then They found that in the breast milk of women nursing babies, there are exceptionally high levels of pesticides, which can cause birth defects and severe problems. And those people up there don't even have plants to use pesticides on. So we're pretty much ruining the whole earth, let alone the wildfires that are happening, the 4 hurricanes that hit Louisiana this season already. I think there's an estimated 130 million people that could die of starvation because of the coronavirus, which is higher than any estimate from the virus itself. And even in first world countries, the brunt of the damage is being taken by the poor people. All the rich people are, in their cabins in the middle of Colorado doing all their stuff online, passed down from their families. And then all the poor people have to work their grocery store jobs that are just so important for society to continue. And, and then I've been looking into African history quite a lot lately. And, when you find that a significant number of African nations have been enveloped in civil wars, and the worst war since World War II was the war in the Congo, where over 5 million people were killed, mostly by disease and starvation, but 300-something thousand were killed in the actual combat itself. Massive sexual violence. The amount of nukes that are still available on Earth. Genetic engineering that could cause significant problems going forward. Of course, these viruses aren't going to stop with our massive, excessive population size. That's really what viruses are. They're telling you that you have too many people in one area. And along with that, when I was on my road trip, going across the whole country, going to South Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, I found this book here. It's Library of America, American Earth. It's an anthology of American environmental writing. And there's a guy, I think his name is George Perkins Marsh. I'm fairly certain that's correct. Guy, lawyer, went to all the good schools. Yeah, George Perkins Marsh. He had a book called Man and Nature, where he pretty much talked about the fact that if you cut down all the trees, you're screwed. If you kill all the animals, you're screwed. 1864, he wrote this. And by, I think, around the year 1900, they had known that global warming was a significant reality due to greenhouse gases. One of the guys that won the first Swedish Nobel Prize in chemistry, if I remember correctly, told the world that global warming is happening over 120 years ago, or roughly 120 years ago. And I just watched this recent David Attenborough documentary that's him kind of looking back at his life, and he delineates how much of the wild has been diminished. Huge percentages in the last 50 years alone have been diminished. There was a kind of startling statistic where if you take all of the mass of animal life on Earth and you kind of add it all up, humans will be roughly 30%. The animals that humans eat will be 60% of the mass of all animals. And wild animals, including elephants, whales, tigers, lions, giraffes, squirrels, whatever, constitutes, I think he said, 4% of the whole mass of animals on Earth. Like, that's how much we've taken over the Earth. And it's horrifying. How can that be anything but horrifying? We've overfished the oceans. From Yoshabak, there's a striking statistic. We've burned 100 million years of trees in the last 100 years or so. 100 million years of trees. How are we going to be able to replace the amount of sunlight that trees can absorb for 100 million years? with any sort of renewable energy. I mean, I'd be willing to accept, an empirical, logical answer to that, but it's hard to imagine myself. And also, watching Interstellar, it's this idea that, we're going to ruin the Earth and we're going to try to escape to another planet. Like, what a stupid, idiotic idea. The only people who are going to get out are going to be, rich people, and they're going to tag along a couple geniuses with them. Can't imagine we're going to solve our economic problems by the time, 100 years or so away from now. And along with that, when you look back in history, there's no shortage of huge collapses of complex societies. This is a book I've been looking at a lot lately, Joseph Tainter, Collapse of Complex Societies, and he goes through all the major civilizations that have existed. The Mayans, the Romans, the Indus Valley, the Anasazi, and southern Colorado, so on. All the major civilizations that failed at some point. He kind of tries to look at why they failed, what the possibilities were, and he also includes sections, obviously, for our similarities with those. And really, it's horrifying to think about. I don't think you can come to another conclusion that, like, the odds are exceptionally low that we're going to make it out of here. Our society is completely insane. Completely insane. And the rich people are all doing the worst, the United States, China, all of Europe. And then the poor people in, India or whatever, Africa, who are kind of doing what we were doing 100 years ago, and we're telling them they shouldn't. Oh, we did it already, it's too late. We got away with it, no one was smart enough, but now you can't do it. You're going to ruin the world if you, have factories or whatever, which is what we already did for hundreds of years. And that's another thing I was thinking about, like the Uyghur concentration camps, as they're calling them. It's like, what were Americans doing to Native Americans for hundreds of years? Forcing them to leave their parents, go to Christian education camps, and learn dumb bullshit all day. It's like, what was that? Were those concentration camps? Because as far as I can tell, that's basically what's happening. They're not, they could be killing some of them. I don't have the evidence, either for or against, but it seems like their main goal is to re-educate them to be more like the Han Chinese, which is more of a nationalist thing than like a, communist or fascist thing. It's what pretty much every nationalist country does. You go somewhere, you have to be more like the ruling group so you don't cause problems. It's what happens in the U.S. all the time. It's always happened in the U.S. It's happening in China, but when China does it, it's evil. What you should say is it's evil there, and it's evil here when it's done. But I doubt that people here view what the U.S. did is as evil as what China is doing now. And it's that same thing where, you did something in the past, oh, it's already in the past. No one could have stopped it. But then someone's doing what you did in the past now because they're living in a different, temporal trajectory. And you have the moral high ground and you can tell them that what they're doing is wrong. But then why did no one say that it was wrong when the people in the United States were doing it? Who was saying it was wrong? And what are people in the United States doing now that is as wrong as the Chinese re-educating the Uyghurs? But we won't know for another 100 years. I have some guesses. I think pets are going to be seen as just like unbelievably barbaric in the future. Like the amount of pets we have, and we, cut their genitals off. Like it's like obvious, and it's treated as like a nuisance. Like, oh, I have to go get my dog's nuts cut off. Wow, wow, I hate I have to go to the vet all the time or whatever. It's like, what? I'm sure that's how people talked about slaves. Like, oh my God, my slaves try to revolt again. Got to deal with that. But anyway, definitely the level of meat consumption and like kind of mistreatment of other animals, it's huge. The wealth inequality, the treatment of the environment for the future. I think people in 100 years are going to be just totally horrified of our stupidity, how badly we ruin things. And of course, the generations that came before my generation are going to be, I think, reviled. But it's like that idea in the Holloman, though. Do not look back on me as a violent soul, just as a hollow man. The broken, totally broken, just lost, wandering like some idiot. Of course, he doesn't say that in the poem. I added that, but yeah, a couple other poems or books I got. For any of you guys that are Croatian out there, or Serbian or Italian, apparently, because he's claimed by all of them. Roger Boscovich, A Theory of Natural Philosophy. I've been interested in this for a while, and I didn't look hard, I guess, because I just found out that there was a printing by MIT of this translation in the 60s. So I'd been looking for his stuff for a while, and he doesn't have a biography in English, which I'm really disappointed about. I wish there was one. And yeah, if you're not familiar with him, he was like the next generation of physicists after Newton and Leibniz. And he developed more on their theories. He tried to do a unification of Newtonian and Leibnizian physics, connection of the monads and Newton's, like, what would it be called? Theory of forces acting at a distance. And he was actually the first guy to come up with the idea of Laplace's demon, where you have an intelligence that knows the velocity and position of molecules or atoms in the universe and can play the universe forward and back at will. Sort of deterministic idea. Laplace wrote it down, I think, was it like 60 or 70 years later, and he was credited with it, but it's just because nobody read this guy. But yeah, he's just one of those polymath guys that is interesting to read, and I just like reading how they thought about things back in that time, scientifically. Another interesting book I got, because I've still been kind of on that kick of learning about Indo-European languages. Even though I'm only learning it to a minimal degree right now, like barely, not learning it at all effectively, but learning about the connection between Sanskrit, Persian, Hindi, Greek, Latin, the Romance languages, the Germanic languages, Russian, all their connections, where they all came from, the mythological connections, like with James Fraser. Just seeing, Finnegan's Wake deals with this, obviously, and that's kind of, I think, what set me off in this direction to an extent. But also, I was pleased to find that a similar thing to this happened in Africa, with the Bantu explosion is what it's called. And I found this book here, An African Classical Age, Eastern and Southern Africa from 1000 BC to 400 AD. Because I realized that, like, the amount I know about Europe from this time period is just immense compared to the amount I know about Africa from the same time period. Even what I know about China and Asia is just significantly more fleshed out than what I know about Africa from this time period. So I wanted to get a book about it and learn more about it. And I was interested in the Bantu explosion because that was another situation where a small group of people in what would be considered modern day Cameroon, so kind of like East Central Africa, their language spread around, and now, I mean, the estimates vary, but it's like 300 to 500 unique languages, depending on how you categorize it, languages, and like 350 million speakers in Africa speak Bantu-derived languages. And, I've been recently looking into the ancient Sumerians and the Indus Valley civilization, and you'll see in a second the Norte Chico civilization in Peru, which is the oldest known civilization in the Americas. They're just slightly after the oldest civilizations anywhere else in the world. I think like 500 to 1,000 years, which is not really slightly, but basically it is when you're that far back. How is it that we don't have an oldest civilization in Africa? I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I don't buy it that the oldest civilization is in, Mesopotamia or even Egypt, because humans have been in, the Rift Valley region, Tanzania, and Eastern Congo, that sort of area, for 200,000 years, the estimate is, and we haven't found like a meaningfully large civilization there, apart from around this era, like 1000 BC or so, is when we find the earliest records, which were around like Ethiopia, and then they were mentioned by the Romans, the Aksum area, Ethiopia and Eritrea, I think I'm saying that right. It's just impossible to believe. How can you believe that? How can you believe that humans have been there for so long and there's not a civilization? It's simply that we haven't found it. And connection with that is I had been looking at this book for a long time, like maybe 3 to 4 years since I found out about this civilization, the La Ciudad Sagrada de Carausupe. Which is the main area where they discovered the Norte Chico civilization, which is in kind of western Peru. And I think when they discovered it, it became the oldest civilization in the Americas by like 2,000 years, which is just like, how is that possible? That we didn't know that. And it was discovered in the 70s, like the 1970s. And then along with that, the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan, in the near the Indus River. It was effectively contemporary with the Sumerians. And they had like 100,000 people as the estimate in their civilization. And it was basically discovered in the 1920s. Like, just imagine the things we haven't discovered about our own human history. All the disappeared civilizations that, are just, maybe mounds under the Sahara Desert or something like that. Or, they look like big hills in, Tanzania or Kenya or Uganda. But they just need to be dug up, and we'll find that the oldest civilization with, certain technologies or whatever, actually, the first earliest ones in Africa, it's just no one's researching it, or, civil wars do make it difficult, obviously. The infrastructure's not there to do research on archaeology, but, I just think there are so many things that need to be learned, and, thinking about Interstellar, thinking about all the science that I want to learn and just haven't done yet, or haven't had time to, or haven't had the dedication to. It's just kind of horrifying how much stuff there is to learn. And I do wonder if someday this, chase is just going to end. I'm just going to be sick of it. Oh yeah. Say something stupid like I'm tired of running from the Father John Misty song, but yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a rambly, boring video, I guess, but yeah, I guess let me know about your thoughts about any of it. Also, recommendations about how to teach. Anyway, yeah. Death is a gang boss.